Both teams are banged up, but the Bucs look to stay undefeated while the Jets look to get their first win. That and more on a crossover Thursday.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into a crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Jets, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New York Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making these shows your first listen or view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I am James Yarcho, the host of Locked On Bucs at @JYarcho_Bucs on Twitter. He is John Butchko, the host of Locked On Jets, and of course of Gang Green Nation. We cover your respective teams 5 days a week here on Locked On Bucs and Locked On Jets. And this crossover Thursday is presented by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. John, I can't believe it's already week 3. It seemed like the NFL season was never going to get here, and now we're clipping right along.
Yeah, and James, this is a really interesting matchup from the Jets' perspective. Let me take you a little back in time.
Okay.
The year is 2018, and about 6 weeks before the draft, the Jets trade up from pick 6 to pick 3. At that point, the consensus was that Sam Darnold was going to go number 1 to the Cleveland Browns. And a lot of people think the Jets were trading up for Baker Mayfield. And the Jets head coach at that time was Todd Bowles. So the Jets are facing this quarterback head coach combo that kind of never was. So, on top of everything else we're going to discuss, I just think it's like a really interesting storyline for the Jets this week that they're facing this duo that they thought they would have.
Yeah, and how strange that alternate universe could have been. Who knows? Maybe Todd Bowles and Baker Mayfield are still in New York if that ended up being the case. But yeah, as somebody looking at the Jets from the outside, seeing Sam Darnold go and do what he did last year with the Vikings, seeing Aaron Rodgers get the start to the season that he had last year, it's gotta be frustrating.
Oh, that's we're just scratching the surface on frustrating. I mean, this is a team that's missed the playoffs 14 straight years. They have not had a winning season since 2015, which was Todd Bowles' first season. Nothing they've done has gone well, and we could spend a week's worth of episodes with me telling you everything that the Jets have done wrong, because the Jets have done a lot to contribute to their own demise through these years. So, and unfortunately last week was not a good week for the New York Jets. And, I know we're going to get into like top storylines. I mean, we could pick a lot of bad storylines for the New York Jets heading into this game.
Well, I mean, let's go ahead and kick it off then. As the visiting team, we are going to start with you. What is the biggest story right now for a Jets team that looked very different between their first 2 games?
They look very different on offense. I will say that. The offense looked very good week 1, and the offense looked very bad week 2. And the biggest difference, I think, was the play of the quarterback, Justin Fields, who was one of the best quarterbacks of week 1 and probably the worst quarterback of week 2. And, that's been Justin Fields' career in a nutshell. When he plays well, he looks like a top 10 quarterback. When he plays poorly, he looks like the worst quarterback in the NFL. On the defensive side of the ball, unfortunately, there was a lot that was the same between week 1 and week 2. The Jets defense, which has good players. Now, they don't have a lot of depth, but their top end talent is pretty decent. They have a pretty decent base to build around, but they've been awful both weeks. They've given up 30 points both games. They've had coverage busts. They've had missed tackles, sloppy missed assignments. And Aaron Glenn was supposed to fix this stuff. I think heading into the season, most Jets fans were realistic. They knew that unless some fluky things happened, this was probably not a winning team. This was probably not a team that was going to even contend for a playoff berth. The hope was that Glenn would come in and instill discipline and instill some order and at least maximize the talent on the team, not have a team that makes a lot of big mistakes. And unfortunately, we've seen that again this week from the last 2 weeks on defense for the New York Jets, where the other teams are making plays, but the Jets are also making it easy for them by making errors. And then, we could also talk about, it's amazing that like the quarterback suffered a concussion last week. And that's like the third thing I'm talking about. But Justin Fields' status is unknown because he left last Sunday's game against the Buffalo Bills with a concussion. So it could be Justin Fields or it could be the veteran Tyrod Taylor taking snaps for the Jets this week.
Yeah, I mean, Bucs fans are no stranger to the injuries. I'll get into that here in a second. But yeah, I mean, you nailed it with Justin Fields. Now, ironically enough, most Bucs fans know this. Jets fans probably won't. The last time the Buccaneers defense had a pick six was against Justin Fields when he was with the Bears back in 2023, and it was Shaq Barrett that got the game-sealing pick six there. So a lot of Bucs fans are kind of crossing their fingers that they see Justin Fields and history repeats itself in this one. But yeah, I mean, you take a look again from the outside looking in. You have Garrett Wilson, you have Sauce Gardner, you have Breece Hall, you have Braylon Allen, you have all these weapons, and then Justin Fields is sitting there going toe to toe with his former team and the Jets' former quarterback, and you would think, okay, maybe the Jets have a little something here. So if it just so happens that they have to go from Justin Fields to Tyrod Taylor, I think that changes the landscape of this game entirely. I don't think, while you still have to worry about Taylor's legs, you don't have to worry about them nearly as much as you have to worry about Justin Fields' legs or arm for that matter. So it's definitely something that we're both going to be keeping an eye on throughout the week. And for the Bucs, the top story is kind of the same. It's the injuries. It was announced on Tuesday that they've lost Calijah Kancey for the season with a torn pectoral. They're already down Tristan Wirfs. They're already down Chris Godwin and Jalen McMillan. Now they appear to be without their right tackle as well, Luke Goedeke, and he was replaced by Charlie Heck on Monday Night Football. And for Jets fans that don't know, Charlie Heck is the guy that was supposed to be the starting left tackle. And instead, the Bucs completely reshuffle their offensive line. They take their starting center in Graham Barton and move him to left tackle. They move their left guard, Ben Bredesen, from guard to center. They promote practice squad guard Michael Jordan, a journeyman, to starting left guard. So the right side of the line was actually the starters. Now you have one starting offensive lineman playing in his actual position, and that's right guard Cody Mauch. We saw the ramifications of that against Houston. Baker was sacked 4 times. He was under duress all day long. It was ugly from a pass protection standpoint, but I think just as big of a loss, obviously, is Calijah Kancey. This is a guy, when he and Vita Vea are on the field together, they're absolute game wreckers. And now, for the 3rd consecutive season, every pro season that Calijah Kancey's had, he's going to miss extended time. This time, maybe you get him back for the playoffs. That has been a timetable that's been established, but you're looking at a pass rush that has had a difficult time getting going, now losing one of their most effective players, and that's certainly going to play a major factor when it comes to quarterbacks running the ball.
James, following the Jets and covering the Jets for as long as I have a PhD, I feel like, in offensive line injuries. And one of the things that you learn when you have as many offensive line injuries as the Jets have through the years is injuries there are a double whammy. Because at most positions, you're putting in a backup who's not as good as a starter. But on the offensive line, it also forces you to reshuffle at a position area where chemistry is paramount. And the Jets had their own offensive line injury just before the start of the season, where Elijah Vera-Tucker suffered a torn triceps. It's his 3rd season-ending injury in the last 4 years. And they had to move the guy who was projected as their starting center, Joe Tippmann, to guard. Fortunately, the offensive line has held up pretty well, more so in week 1 than in week 2. But we in New York, we know how difficult injuries are, but particularly up front.
All right. Well, we are going to get into the matchups that will decide this game. That is coming up next on a crossover Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Jets. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else. From footwork to breath work, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with the confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs and Locked On Jets your first listen or view every single day. John, when you take a look at the matchups that we're going to have, the game within the game, what's one of the key matchups that you look at that can help propel the Jets to their first win of the season?
Well, I look at the Tampa Bay defense, and there is a player on the Buccaneers who has a rather tortured history with the Jets franchise, and that is Haason Reddick, who was a member of the Jets last year. Maybe the first time in NFL history a team has traded for a player and that player immediately held out. And this is another topic where we could probably do a week's worth of episodes talking about a bad moment in Jets history. And there's no other way to put it. Reddick ended his holdout, and he mailed it in last year. He signed his contract right before the Jets played their Week 7 game against the Steelers and did nothing. He did nothing the rest of the season. The trade was a fiasco for the Jets. It was one of many fiascos last year, but he's gone to Tampa Bay, and predictably, as often happens with the Jets, a guy who completely disappoints with the Jets goes somewhere else and looks pretty good. He's going to line up a lot against Armand Membou, the rookie right tackle for the Jets, who has been a real pleasant surprise, not from the standpoint that anybody questioned his talent. He's been a pleasant surprise from the standpoint that he's playing at a high level quicker than a lot of people anticipated, including myself. Coming out of Missouri, he was a guy who, he has all the physical tools you need, very strong, very athletic, plays with a nasty streak, but there were some technical things that needed to be cleaned up. And one of the things you see frequently, maybe not so much in Tampa Bay, because you guys had Tristan Wirfs, who was immediately great, but most tackles in the NFL, even like high first-round picks who become really good, have some growing pains. Armand Membou had a couple of hiccups last week against Joey Bosa, but he's handled two very difficult assignments well. Week 1, he shut out TJ Watt. Got some help on some plays, but TJ Watt really got nothing off him. So the Jets, whether it's Fields or whether it's Taylor at quarterback, both guys have mobility, but you want to keep them clean. And I think that the rookie will have a very difficult assignment against a guy who is one of the least popular players in recent Jets history. So it's going to drive Jets fans crazy if Haason Reddick gets a sack on Sunday. It's also important for the Jets' chances in this game that they keep him off the board.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Reddick ramps himself up, because he has back-to-back revenge games. After the Jets, the Bucs get the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's certainly going to be interesting. And we know that Reddick has this game circled on his calendar and probably has from the moment last season ended. He just said, whenever I'm going somewhere where I get to play the Jets. And Reddick has been pretty good. He doesn't have the stats that you would necessarily hope that he has, but he has been incredibly effective. And, he led the NFL in pressure rate in week 1. I haven't seen his rate for week 2 as of yet, but he's been an effective piece. But oddly enough, Todd Bowles keeps dropping him back in coverage on third downs. And I can't say that I love that. If you're going to pay Haason Reddick all that money, you should probably have him go after the quarterback on third downs. But Todd Bowles knows more than I do, so who am I to question him? For the Bucs defense, the first matchup that I have circled is Zion McCollum / Jamel Dean / Benjamin Morrison against Garrett Wilson. So Wilson, he had a great game against the Steelers. He had a really solid game against the Bills. But the Bucs have allowed under 60 yards receiving to their opponent's number 1 receiver through 2 games. So Drake London gets 55 in week 1. Nico Collins had just 52 and a touchdown on Monday Night Football. But the Bucs defense has not had one player shadow that top receiver. That's not how they operate. So it's been a platoon of Zion, Jamel, and then last week, Benjamin Morrison made his NFL debut. When he was on Nico Collins, he didn't give up a single reception. So if the Bucs are going to control this game, they have to remove Garrett Wilson from the equation and force the Jets to go elsewhere, whether that's former Buccaneer Tyler Johnson or whoever, force the passes to go somewhere else. And if it turns into having to rely on Breece Hall or Braylon Allen in the running game, that's going to play right into the Bucs' strength, which is stopping the run. They're allowing just over 3 yards a carry this season. It would be far less if not for a 25-yard touchdown by Chubb at the end of Monday night's game. Up to that point, Chubb had 11 carries for 18 yards. Week 1, they held Bijan and Tyler Algier to 24 yards apiece. So if the secondary is able to take away any good looks for Garrett Wilson, then they stand a really good chance of just taking control of this game early on.
All right, well, James, I'll give you my second matchup, and I'm not going to score any points for creativity with this one because for the second time I'm going edge rusher versus tackle. But I think a really important matchup for the Jets in this game is Will McDonald versus Graham Barton. McDonald had a breakout season a year ago. He had 10.5 sacks as a defensive end after a quiet rookie year. Week 1 against Pittsburgh, he played well. He had 2 sacks. Week 2 against Buffalo, it was a very quiet game for McDonald. Now, I'm not going to say that in a system-wide meltdown on defense that McDonald was the difference. But if this Jets defense wants to slow down the Tampa Bay offense, Will McDonald has to play well because for the Jets right now, the secondary is in bad shape. And the secondary needs to play better, but I don't really have a ton of faith in the guys back there beyond Sauce Gardner. You're seeing breakdowns. You're seeing guys losing coverage. I'm not sure after Sauce Gardner, there's enough talent in the Jets secondary to hold up on its own, which means they're going to need their pass rush to camouflage things. And, as you discussed, the Bucs have a guy playing left tackle who's, learning a new position on the fly. And it's the most, maybe the most difficult position to learn on the offensive line. McDonald is a guy who's added an extra element to his game over the course of the offseason. A year ago, he was really kind of like a finesse pass rusher. He was a speed rush, spin move kind of guy. And those were 2 moves that complemented each other. And those played a big role in him getting those 10.5 sacks a year ago. In week 1, he had a sack off a bull rush. And he's added bulk this offseason. He was one of the smallest defensive linemen in the NFL his first 2 years, but Jets have had him add some strength this offseason. So I think he's a more complete pass rusher. And I think that if the Jets are going to slow down this Tampa Bay offense, it's going to have to be through the pass rush because I just don't know that the secondary is going to hold up. As much as I'd love to tell you that guys are going to improve after 2 weeks, I don't know that the talent's there after Sauce Gardner.
Yeah, well, and I love Sauce. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL to watch. I hope he doesn't have a good game on Sunday, but being somebody who lives 40 minutes away from the University of Cincinnati, I've watched him for years and years and years. Absolutely phenomenal player. But you're 100% right. Graham Barton, for as well as he held up against the Falcons in week 1, he got worked a little bit against the Texans. Now, the Texans pass rush and the Falcons pass rush are 2 very different animals. While, Atlanta's has gotten much better, Houston's is absolutely phenomenal. So that is a major concern. Baker took a beating. It shouldn't surprise anyone if he is a DNP on the injury report at some point this week. He's probably going to be limited when he does participate. If you're a Jets fan and you see that Baker didn't practice, he's still going to play. He's going to play Sunday. Don't get any false hope that you're going to face Teddy Two Gloves. Baker will be on the field, but they have to figure out something to help out Graham Barton and help out Charlie Heck on the ends of those offensive lines because they're not going to be able to win if they allow Baker to take the kind of beating that he took against Houston. He just can't do that on a short week in back-to-back weeks. For the first time this season, my offensive matchup to watch does not involve Emeka Egbuka. For me in this one, it's Bucky and Rashad versus the Jets run defense. So Rashad averaged 6.5 yards a carry against the Texans, while Bucky was a little over 4 yards per carry. They combined for 130 rushing yards. Now, the Jets gave up over 5 a carry to the Bills last week, and James Cook ran for 132 and 2 touchdowns. The Bucs have been at their best this season running the ball against a loaded box. They're getting at least 4 yards a carry against 6+ man fronts and averaging over 5 yards a carry overall on the season. For the Jets, it's the complete opposite. The more guys they have in the box, the more yards per carry they've been giving up. On 8-man looks, they're giving up over 6.5 yards a carry, and they're allowing just under 4.5 overall on the season. If the Bucs are going to win this with that makeshift offensive line that the Jets pass rush is looking to take advantage of, then they showed against Houston that the best way that they can do that is attack on the ground. And of course, the more they pound the rock, the more play action will start to open up for guys like Ibuka, like Sterling Shepard, like Cam Johnson, and those other players. All right, we are going to get to our keys to victory. That is coming up next on today's episodes of Locked On Bucs and Locked On Jets. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-hour energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with zero sugar and zero crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. I can fit it in my pocket. I can toss it in my cooler, and it takes up absolutely no space. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get the boost when you need it. I'm a big fan of the berry flavor. It's the one I've been drinking for years, and I have a lot of early mornings because of my job and my son's travel hockey schedule. So that boost that I get to start my day with can be an absolute lifesaver, not to mention the sugar-free, so I don't have to worry about that dreaded crash later on. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-hour energy shots. Get the favorites that you love or be bold and try something new in-store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every single day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes, all in less than 60 seconds. It's quick, it's easy. It's honestly my favorite way to follow along with football. It really is, a fun way to stay locked in. Even if your team isn't playing and you couldn't care less about the teams that are playing, you can still make that game mean something to you and be even more excited to kick back and watch it. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Wrapping things up here on a crossover Thursday, and this crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. I am James Yarcho, host of Locked On Bucs. He is John Butchko, host of Locked On Jets. And let's get into it, John. What do the Jets need to do to win this game?
My first key for the Jets is shorten the game. And I think that means that, first of all, they'll have to run the ball effectively. And that, as you mentioned, that's not going to be an easy task against this Tampa Bay defense. But this is an offense that's first and foremost built on the run game. And that's going to be true whether Justin Fields is a quarterback or whether Tyrod Taylor's a quarterback. With Fields, the run game is an important part of what he brings to the table. If Taylor's in there, well, you're playing your backup quarterback, which means you can't put everything in his hands. So I think that it's important to shorten the game. First of all, run the ball effectively. But second of all, I think that they need to run the play clock down between plays. Now, you hear that a lot when there's a matchup that seems like a mismatch on paper. And usually that's the recipe you get for the team that's the underdog. And I don't know that that's always the case. That's always the best analysis because, essentially if you're shortening the game, that means like you need to put together a lot of like 10-play scoring drives. If you're the less talented team, putting together like 10 straight good plays against a more talented opponent is easier said than done. But I think that there's another factor in this game. And the schedule makers, I think, did the Jets a lot of favors. But one thing that they did that was not so great for the Jets was they scheduled this trip to Florida in September because it's still really hot in Florida this time of year. And I checked the weather before we started recording. It's supposed to be a day where the heat index is over 100. And this is not a Jets team with a lot of depth. And that's particularly true on the defensive line. On the defensive line, the Jets really only have 3 good players: Quinnen Williams, Will McDonald, and Jermaine Johnson. And it gets really thin after that. Their number 3 defensive end is Michael Clemens, whose only real contribution this year, and I'm not saying this to be sarcastic, his only real contribution this year was a roughing the passer penalty against Josh Allen through the first 2 games that extended the Buffalo scoring drive. He's not been on the stat sheet: no tackles, no sacks, no pressures, even though he's seen a heavy snap total so far this year. So the Jets just can't afford to get into a game where the Bucs are running a lot of snaps, because they're going to have to rotate defensive linemen. And when they rotate defensive linemen, they get into trouble. Week 1, there were a couple of times where Aaron Rodgers caught the Jets with backup defensive linemen on the field, and they went no huddle, so they could not substitute. And Pittsburgh produced some big plays there, just because the Jets don't have the depth that they had 2 or 3 years ago on the defensive line. So I think, if we're talking about playing holistic football, Jets need to shorten this game. Jets need to have some long offensive series, run the ball effectively, and run that play clock down between snaps.
Yeah, and I will say, as frustrated as Bucs fans get over it, the Bucs are going to be in white uniforms. They're wearing their 1976 throwback, so it's the white uniforms with the creamsicle numbers. It's going to get real hot. That temperature differential between the lighter jerseys and the darker jerseys is a very, very real thing. And if you're not used to that heat and that humidity, it's going to be a long day, especially since I'm sure the Bucs are not going to go out of their way to provide any kind of shade or shelter like they will on their own sidelines. For the Bucs offensively, it's about picking your spots. You didn't give Baker any time at all in the pocket against Houston, so don't think that you can stand up and give him all day to sit back there and throw. You have to pound the rock with Bucky and Rashad, even sprinkle in some Sean Tucker, but just keep running. That will not only control the clock and keep that defense on the field much, much longer and wear them down, and that's going to make them more susceptible later in games. That's when you can really start to let it fly off of play action. Look for Ibuka and Shep and Otten and Cam. I think this is a game where Bucs fans are going to get frustrated with Evans' usage. I'm going to assume that Sauce is going to follow him everywhere. But the respect that he commands, not just from a single corner, but from the defense as a whole, has opened things up for Emeka Ibuka early on this season. I expect that to continue. Defensively, you have to figure out how to get this pass rush going. There was a golden opportunity against Houston and their makeshift offensive line, and it took half the game before the pressure started to close in on CJ Stroud. The team finished with 3 sacks, but Stroud was able to sit in the pocket for what seemed like forever and find open guys. If Fields plays, of course, he is a massive threat to run the ball, so you have to stay disciplined, which is not something that they have done well the first 2 weeks against Penix and Stroud in terms of allowing them to run through the second level of the defense. Kancey is out. It's on Greg Gaines and rookie 5th-round pick Elijah Roberts to step up. I love seeing the blitzes from Tyke Smith and Levante David and Benjamin Morrison last week, but they have to create more pressure and more sacks from their natural pass rush, and that means Haason Reddick, who's going to be hyped for this one, as well as Yaya Diaby.
So I have another key for the Jets, and this might sound basic, but the Jets need to clean up their mistakes on defense. I think that most objective observers watching this game would conclude Tampa Bay is the better team. And if Tampa Bay plays its A game and the Jets play their A game, the Buccaneers are probably going to win. What the Jets cannot do is hand gifts to the Buccaneers, because the Jets' defense has done that the first 2 weeks. Against Pittsburgh week 1, most of the big plays the Steelers created were off busted coverages. And week 2 against the Bills offense played pretty well, particularly in the run game, but guys were messing up run fits. The Jets were not making tackles. Guys were overrunning the ball. And, I said this at the start of the show, that these are the types of things Aaron Glenn was brought in to clean up, and they have not been cleaned up at all. And I think one of the most disturbing things is that a lot of the guys the Jets brought in this offseason, the new members of the team, have been culprits in the mistakes that they've made. It's one thing to lose because the other guy outperformed you. It's another to lose because you're handing them easy plays. And that's something the Jets have done too frequently the first 2 games. And, I don't know how they do it. You just hope that the coaches have been able to drill it into them in practice this week, that these mistakes, these unforced errors need to be eliminated.
Yeah, the one that comes to the top of my mind is you go back to the James Cook touchdown run last week when he should have been hit for a loss. Then he should have been tackled for no gain. And instead he's 44 yards, a cloud of dust, and a touchdown in the blink of an eye. So Bucs fans are hoping that Bucky and or Rashad are able to find some space like that in this one. But John, we've talked about the injuries. We've talked about the matchups. What kind of prediction do you have for this one?
All right, so I'm not predicting the final score. Here's my prediction is that Aaron Glenn's not going to tell us who the starting quarterback is until Sunday, because if you go back to week 1, the Jets nominally had a center competition between Josh Myers and Joe Tippmann in training camp. And Glenn did not even reveal the results of that company. He did not tell us who was starting at center in week 1. And like that was going to make a difference to how the Steelers were going to attack that game. And the irony is because of Elijah Vera Tucker's injury that week, they both started. Tippmann moved to right guard and Myers started at center. At the quarterback position, there actually is reason for the Jets to withhold this information, because I think you would see two very different styles between Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor. They both have the ability to run the ball, but Taylor, particularly in his mid-30s, is not a guy you're going to design a lot of runs for the way you would with Fields, whereas Taylor, I think, is going to be a more effective guy on a play-to-play basis as a passer. And there are a lot of Jets fans who want Taylor to start this game because Fields was so bad on Sunday. And I think that the floor is higher with Taylor in there. Taylor will not miss the easy passes Fields missed against Buffalo. But I just don't think the Jets have enough explosive players on offense to make it work with Tyrod. I think that in order to get the splash plays that you need to win, you need Fields in there. So I have a tough time seeing the Jets winning this game if Tyrod Taylor plays quarterback. If Justin Fields plays quarterback, it could be a disaster like it was against Buffalo, but it also could be a good Justin Fields game. And if it's a good Justin Fields game, the Jets have a puncher's chance.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Justin Fields gives you a chance to win in any game. It's a different style, but I equate it to Jameis Winston. You can have Jameis go out there and win a game he absolutely is not supposed to, but he's also the kind of quarterback that'll lose you a game that you're not supposed to. So, I can absolutely see that, because that is, a very different team that you're going to face based on which quarterback is in the game. So the longer you can hold out and not reveal who's going to be under center, I think that's an advantage for the Jets. I'm also not going to do a score prediction. I'll do that on my Friday episode. I do think that, the Bucs, as they have the first 2 weeks, are going to find a way to win this game. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be lopsided. It's probably going to be a single digit point differential. But even with the offensive line struggles and the injuries there, I think that at the end of the day, much like against Houston, the Bucs just have too many weapons to not be able to find a way to win this game. And they first week it was Emeka Egbuka. Monday it was Bucky and Rashad. This game, for all we know, it could be a Mike Evans game. He could blow up for 140 and 2 touchdowns. I doubt it against Sauce, but if it's not one of those guys, it could be Otten, it could be Shepard. They're deep at the skill positions, and they're going to be able to find those mismatches, create those mismatches, and once again find a way to get this win in front of their home crowd for the first time this season. So that is going to do it for this crossover Thursday. Of course, check out everything that John is doing on Locked On Jets and over at Gangrene Nation. You can find everything that I'm doing over at Locked On Bucs and on Twitter at @Yarcho_Bucs. Make sure that you're subscribed to these shows 5 days a week, covering your Buccaneers and your Jets. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy. And we want to thank you so much for joining us here on a crossover Thursday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.